6 months later, the Riverside Elementary Library had been transformed into something Margaret Morrison would have loved. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Henry Morrison could be found there with a group of 8 to 12 children, teaching them the simple magic tricks that his wife had once used to fill Friday afternoons with wonder. Sarah served as his assistant, helping younger children with finger positions for coin tricks and encouraging the shy ones to practice their magic words. She had discovered that helping others learn magic was just as rewarding as performing it herself, especially when she saw the moment of pure delight that crossed a child's face when their first trick worked perfectly. Remember, the secret to good magic isn't making people believe in impossible things, Henry would tell each new group of students. It's helping them remember that the world is full of wonderful possibilities they might not have noticed before. The Magic Club had become so popular that Mrs. Henderson had started a waiting list for children who wanted to join. Parents began staying after pickup time to watch their children perform the tricks they had learned, and several teachers had asked Henry if he might consider doing a workshop for the faculty. On a particularly warm Tuesday in April, Sarah was helping 6-year-old Tommy Chin practice making a silk scarf disappear when she noticed something unusual. Henry was sitting at his regular teaching table, but instead of working with his student group, he was staring at something in his hands with a puzzled expression. "Mr. Morrison, is everything okay?" Sarah asked, leaving Tommy to continue practicing on his own. Henry looked up, and Sarah could see a mixture of confusion and wonder in his eyes. "Sarah, the strangest thing has happened. I was cleaning out Margaret's jewelry box this morning, looking for a pair of earrings I thought one of her nieces might like to have, when I found this." He opened his hands to reveal a small, folded piece of paper that looked very old. The edges were yellowed, and the creases were worn soft from age. It was tucked behind the velvet lining, in a place where it could have been hidden for years without anyone noticing. Sarah sat down beside him. "What does it say?" Henry unfolded the paper carefully, revealing handwriting that Sarah recognized as Margaret's, though it looked different from the journal entries she had seen before. This writing was more careful, more deliberate, as if each word had been chosen with great thought. "It's dated 2 weeks before she died," Henry said softly. "But, Sarah, I don't understand how she could have written this." At that point, she hadn't spoken a coherent sentence in months, and her hands shook too badly to hold a pen. He handed the paper to Sarah, and she read Margaret's final message aloud. "My dearest Henry, if you are reading this, then the magic I planned has worked exactly as I hoped. By now you will have met a young girl with dark hair who performs magic tricks with a white rabbit. You will have found the newspaper article from our dance contest, and you will have shared my dream journal with her. Most importantly, you will have remembered that magic is really about creating moments of joy for other people. I have been hiding this letter for you to find when you were ready to stop grieving and start living again. I knew it might take months, but I also knew that when the right moment came, you would find what you needed to find. Henry, my love, I want you to give the girl my white gloves. They serve their purpose for me, helping me feel beautiful and confident on the night I fell in love with you. Now they should help someone else discover the magic of bringing joy to others. Tell her that magic runs in mysterious circles, and that sometimes the most important tricks are the ones that connect hearts across time and space. Tell her that I have been watching her performances from wherever I am now, and that I am very proud of the way she handles unexpected moments with grace and kindness. Most of all, tell her thank you for giving my husband a reason to believe and wonder again. That is the greatest magic trick anyone could ever perform. All my love, in this world, and whatever comes next, Margaret." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she finished reading. Around them, the Magic Club continued with its usual cheerful chaos. Children practicing coin vanishes, small groups huddled over trick card instructions, and the gentle sound of Henry's other students learning to make silk flowers appear from empty boxes. "Mr. Morrison, this is impossible," Sarah whispered. How could she know all of those things would happen? How could she know about me specifically? Henry smiled through his own tears. "I stopped trying to understand the impossible months ago, my dear. I just learned to be grateful for it instead." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the familiar white gloves that Sarah had seen him holding that first night at the talent show. "Margaret wants you to have these," he said, placing them gently in Sarah's hands. She believed they carried some kind of magic, and I think she's right. They helped her feel confident enough to win a dance contest with a nervous young man in 1952. Maybe they'll help you feel confident enough to spread joy and wonder for many years to come. Sarah looked down at the gloves, feeling the soft cotton fabric and noticing the careful mend work that Margaret had done to keep them beautiful despite their age. They were elegant and timeless, and holding them made Sarah feel connected to something much larger than herself. "I can't take these," she protested. "They're too important, too personal." "Sarah, Margaret spent 71 years learning about love and magic. If she says these gloves belong with you now, then I trust her judgment completely." Henry's voice was firm but kind. "Besides, I think she's right about magic running in circles. These gloves helped her create one kind of magic, and now they're going to help you create another." That evening, Sarah sat in her bedroom wearing Margaret's white gloves and practicing card tricks in front of her mirror. The gloves fit perfectly, as if they had been made for her hands, and she found that wearing them made her feel more confident and graceful in her movements. Her mother knocked on the door and entered to find Sarah performing an elaborate flourish with a deck of cards. "Those are beautiful gloves, sweetheart. Are they new?" Sarah told her mother the story of Margaret's hidden letter and Henry's gift. As she spoke, she realized that the events of the past 6 months had taught her something profound about the nature of magic and love. "Mom, do you think people can plan magic even after they're gone?" Her mother sat on the edge of the bed and considered the question seriously. "I think people who love deeply enough can set things in motion that continue long after they're no longer here to see them happen." Margaret Morrison found a way to make sure her husband wouldn't be alone, and that sounds like the most powerful magic of all. Sarah nodded, looking down at the gloves that now belonged to her. "I want to do something special for Mr. Morrison, something that would make Mrs. Morrison proud." "What did you have in mind?" Sarah smiled, and her mother could see that an idea was beginning to form. "Next month is the anniversary of the summer festival where Mr. and Mrs. Morrison had their first dance. I want to organize a magic show for the whole town, with all the children from the Magic Club performing, and I want to dedicate it to Mrs. Morrison's memory." Her mother's eyes lit up. "That sounds wonderful, honey. I'm sure the town would love to participate in something like that." Over the next few weeks, Sarah threw herself into planning the memorial magic show with the same determination she had once applied to perfecting her rabbit tricks. She coordinated with Mrs. Henderson to get permission to use the school auditorium, worked with Henry to make sure all the Magic Club children had acts they felt confident performing, and even convinced the high school marching band to provide music for the event. The night of the show, the auditorium was packed with families, friends, and community members who had come to celebrate Margaret Morrison's legacy and watch a new generation of young magicians perform. Henry sat in the front row, wearing his best suit and holding the program that listed Margaret as the honorary inspiration for the evening. As Sarah walked onto the stage for the opening performance, wearing Margaret's white gloves and feeling more confident than she ever had before, she looked out at the audience and saw hundreds of faces ready to believe in magic. In the back corner of the auditorium, the same spot where Henry had sat alone 6 months earlier, she could almost see a figure in a blue dress and white gloves, clapping silently and smiling with pure joy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced into the microphone, "tonight we celebrate the magic of Margaret Morrison, who spent her life teaching children that the world is full of wonderful possibilities. She believed that magic is really about creating moments of joy for other people, and that's exactly what we're here to do tonight." She raised her hands, and Snowball appeared right on cue from behind the curtain, hopping confidently across the stage to enthusiastic applause. But this time, Sarah was ready for anything that might happen, because she had learned that the best magic comes not from perfect execution, but from perfect love. The white gloves caught the stage lights as Sarah began her performance, and in that moment, she understood that she was part of a magic trick that had been 71 years in the making, a trick designed to prove that love and wonder could transcend time, death, and the space between one heart and another. As laughter filled the auditorium, and children performed magic tricks they had learned from a man whose heart had been healed by unexpected friendship, Margaret Morrison's final and greatest illusion was complete. She had made love appear where loneliness had been, and joy return where grief had settled. The applause that night was not just for the magic tricks performed on stage, but for the magic that happens when people choose to believe in wonder, connection, and the possibility that sometimes the most important things we do are the ones we never planned at all. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself thinking about Henry Morrison more often than she expected. She had given him the newspaper article and assumed that would be the end of their connection. But something about their conversation in the library had created a bond she couldn't easily forget. 3 weeks after the talent show, Sarah was surprised to see Henry sitting on a bench outside the school during her lunch recess. He was feeding breadcrumbs to a small group of sparrows, and he looked more peaceful than he had in the library. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah called out as she ran across the playground toward him. "What are you doing here?" Henry looked up with a warm smile. "Hello, Sarah. I hope you don't mind an old man visiting your school. I was having lunch at the diner across the street and saw all you children playing outside. It reminded me of when Margaret was a teacher here many years ago." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mrs. Morrison was a teacher at Riverside Elementary?" "Oh yes, for 37 years. She taught second grade, right there in that classroom." Henry pointed to a window on the first floor of the school building. "She retired in 1987, but she always said those were the happiest years of her working life. She loved children, you see. We never had any of our own, but Margaret always said she had hundreds of children over the years." Sarah sat down on the bench beside Henry, fascinated by this new information. "Did she ever do magic shows for her classes?" Henry chuckled. "Every Friday afternoon. She wasn't very good at it, mind you, but the children didn't care. She would make scarves disappear up her sleeves and pull plastic flowers out of empty boxes. Simple tricks, but the children were always amazed." He paused, scattering more breadcrumbs for the sparrows. "She said magic taught them to believe in possibilities beyond what they could see." "That's beautiful," Sarah said softly. She watched the sparrows pecking at the crumbs and thought about a young Margaret Morrison performing simple magic tricks for 7-year-olds every Friday afternoon for 37 years. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you again for finding that newspaper article. I've been carrying it with me everywhere, along with Margaret's glove." Henry reached into his coat pocket and pulled out both items. The newspaper clipping was already showing signs of wear from being handled so frequently. "But more than that, I wanted to tell you something important." Sarah turned to face him fully, sensing that whatever he was about to say would be significant. "Since our conversation at the library, I've been thinking a lot about what Margaret would want me to do with the rest of my life. For months after she died, I felt like I was just marking time, going through the motions of living without really being alive." Henry's voice grew stronger as he continued. "But meeting you and seeing how you handled that moment on stage when your trick didn't work the way you planned, it reminded me that Margaret would want me to keep creating moments of wonder, even if they're small ones." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. Henry smiled mysteriously. "I've been talking to Mrs. Henderson about volunteering at the school. She says they could use help with the drama program, and I thought I might teach some of the younger children simple magic tricks, the way Margaret used to do." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. That would be amazing. The kids would love learning magic from someone who really understands it. "Well, I'm not sure I understand magic any better than anyone else," Henry said with a laugh. "But I understand the importance of believing in wonder. And I think Margaret would approve of me sharing that belief with a new generation of children." The lunch bell rang, and Sarah realized she needed to get back to class. But as she stood up to leave, Henry called her name. "Sarah, there's something else. Something I found when I was looking through Margaret's things last week." He reached into his other coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "Margaret kept a journal for 60 years. I hadn't been able to bring myself to read it until recently, but when I finally did, I found something that I think you should see." He opened the notebook to a page marked with a small ribbon and handed it to Sarah. The handwriting was delicate and feminine, written in fading blue ink. The entry was dated 3 months before Margaret's death. Sarah read aloud. "Had the strangest dream last night. I was young again, wearing my white gloves and dancing with Henry at the summer festival. But in the dream, There was also a young girl with dark hair who was performing magic tricks. When her rabbit escaped from its box, everyone in the audience started laughing, including me. The girl looked right at me and said, "Magic is about making people believe in joy." When I woke up, I felt happier than I have in months. I hope Henry remembers that magic is really about joy. Sarah stared at the page, her hands trembling slightly. The description of the girl in Margaret's dream sounded remarkably like herself, and the details about the rabbit escaping matched exactly what had happened at the talent show. "Mr. Morrison, this is impossible. Mrs. Morrison wrote this months before the talent show ever happened. How could she dream about something that hadn't occurred yet?" Henry gently took the notebook back and closed it carefully. "I don't know, my dear. But Margaret always believed that time worked differently when it came to love and magic. She used to say that the heart could sometimes see around corners that the mind couldn't navigate." Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms despite the warm afternoon sunshine. The connection between Margaret's dream and the events of the talent show was too specific to be coincidence, but too impossible to be anything else. "Do you think she somehow knew she was going to meet me through you?" Sarah asked. "I think Margaret knew that love finds a way to continue even after we're gone," Henry replied. "And I think she wanted me to find you and Emma and all the other young people who still believe in magic, so that I could remember how to believe in joy again." The final bell rang, indicating that afternoon classes were about to begin. Sarah knew she had to run to avoid being late, but she couldn't bring herself to leave Henry sitting alone on the bench with his memories and his wife's prophetic dreams. "Mr. Morrison, when you start teaching magic at the school, could I help you? I could be your assistant or help set up the tricks or whatever you need." Henry's face brightened. "I would be honored to have you as my assistant, Sarah. In fact, I can't think of anyone Margaret would rather have me work with." As Sarah ran back toward the school building, she turned once to wave at Henry. He was still sitting on the bench, but he no longer looked lonely. The sparrows had grown bold enough to land on his outstretched hand, and he was talking to them softly, as if they were old friends. That evening, Sarah told her parents about Henry's plan to volunteer at the school and about Margaret's dream journal. Her father listened thoughtfully, while her mother made interested sounds at all the right moments. "It sounds like you've made a real difference in this man's life," her mother said as she tucked Sarah into bed. "Sometimes the most important magic we can perform is helping someone else remember how to be happy." "Mom, do you believe that people can dream about things before they happen?" Her mother considered this carefully. "I think there are many things in the world that we don't understand yet. Love is one of them. And so is the way our hearts can sometimes know things that our minds can't explain. If Margaret Morrison dreamed about you before she met you, maybe that's just proof that some connections are meant to happen." As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she thought about the chain of events that had started with Snowball's escape from the magic box. A failed trick had led to meeting Henry, which had led to finding a newspaper article, which had led to reading a dream journal that seemed to predict the future. She realized that real magic wasn't about making things appear and disappear according to plan. Real magic was about being open to unexpected moments of connection and wonder, especially when nothing went according to plan. In her last conscious moment before sleep, Sarah could almost hear the sound of laughter coming from somewhere beyond the edges of her understanding, and she smiled, knowing that Margaret Morrison's magic was still working in the world. The next morning, Sarah woke up thinking about Henry Morrison and his wife's glove. She had expected to feel disappointed about her magic trick failing, but instead she found herself replaying the conversation with the elderly man over and over in her mind. There had been something in his eyes when he talked about Margaret's laughter that stayed with her. Over breakfast, she told her parents about meeting Henry, though she left out the part about sneaking away from the backstage area to talk to a stranger. Her mother listened thoughtfully as she described the man who came to school shows to remember his wife. "That's very touching, sweetie," her mother said, buttering toast for Sarah's younger brother. "It sounds like your performance meant more to him than you realized." "Mom, what happens to people when someone they love dies? I mean, how do they keep going?" Sarah asked the question that had been bothering her since the night before. Her father looked up from his newspaper. "Well, I think they find ways to carry the love with them. Like this Henry fellow coming to magic shows because his wife enjoyed them." He's keeping part of her alive by doing things that would have made her happy. Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she should do. Henry had seemed so alone sitting in that back corner, holding onto a piece of fabric that connected him to 7 decades of marriage. It didn't feel right to just let him disappear back into his solitary life. After breakfast, Sarah called Emma and convinced her to ride bikes to the town library. "I want to look up Henry Morrison," she explained as they pedaled down Oak Street toward the center of town. "Why?" Emma asked, steering around a puddle left over from the previous night's rain. "I don't know exactly. I just feel like there's more to his story, and maybe we can find out something that would help." The Riverside Public Library was a beautiful old building with tall windows and carved stone details that made it look like a castle. Mrs. Patterson, the head librarian, had known Sarah since she was little and always greeted her with enthusiasm. "Well, hello there, Sarah. I heard your magic show was quite the hit last night. My neighbor's granddaughter was there and said it was the most exciting performance of the evening." Sarah blushed slightly. "Actually, that's sort of what I wanted to ask you about. Do you know a man named Henry Morrison? He's older, maybe in his 70s, and his wife's name was Margaret." Mrs. Patterson's expression immediately grew warm. "Oh my goodness, yes. Henry has been coming to the library for months now, ever since Margaret passed away. He sits in the reading room and goes through old newspapers, but he never checks anything out. I've been wondering how to approach him because he seems so lost." "What do you mean, he goes through old newspapers?" Emma asked. "He looks at papers from the 1950s and 1960s mostly. I think he's trying to remember things from when he and Margaret were young. Sometimes I see him writing notes on little pieces of paper, but he always takes them with him when he leaves." Sarah felt her heart squeeze with sympathy. The image of Henry sitting alone in the library, searching through decades-old newspapers for memories of his wife, was almost too sad to bear. "Mrs. Patterson, could you show us those newspapers? The ones from the 1950s. The librarian looked curious, but agreed to help. She led them to a section of the library Sarah had never explored before, where tall metal cabinets held bound volumes of the town's newspaper dating back more than a century. "What are we looking for?" Emma whispered as Mrs. Patterson pulled out several heavy volumes. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "But Henry said his wife loved magic shows, and they had their first dance in 1952. Maybe there's something in these papers about that time." They spent the next 2 hours carefully turning the yellowed pages of newspapers from 1952 and 1953. Most of the articles were about local politics, farming news, and social events that seemed very formal compared to modern life. But then, in the August 15th, 1952 edition, Sarah found what she was looking for. "Look at this," she exclaimed, pointing to a small article near the bottom of page 3. The headline read, "Local Couple Wins Dance Contest at Summer Festival." Emma leaned over to read the article aloud. Henry Morrison, 19, and Margaret Wilson, 18, took first place in the waltz competition at the annual Riverside Summer Festival on Saturday evening. The young couple, who have been courting for 6 months, impressed judges with their grace and obvious affection for one another. Miss Wilson wore white gloves and a blue dress that belonged to her grandmother, while Mr. Morrison borrowed his father's best suit for the occasion. Sarah stared at the tiny black and white photograph that accompanied the article. Even though it was grainy and small, she could clearly see a young man who looked like Henry holding hands with a beautiful girl in a dress with a full skirt. The girl was indeed wearing white gloves and smiling radiantly at her dance partner. "That's them," Sarah whispered. "That's Henry and Margaret at their first dance together." Emma pointed to another line in the article. "Look, it says the festival featured Professor Amazing's Magic Spectacular as the main entertainment. So they were at a magic show the same night they won the dance contest." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Everything was connected. The magic show, the dance, the white gloves, and the beginning of a love story that would last 71 years. She carefully made copies of the article and the photograph, her mind racing with possibilities. "Mrs. Patterson," she said as they returned the newspaper volumes to their proper places, "when does Henry usually come to the library?" "Most afternoons around 2 o'clock. He stays until closing time at 6. "Why do you ask?" Sarah looked at the clock on the library wall. It was almost 1:30 now. "Is it okay if Emma and I wait for him. I have something I think he'd want to see. Mrs. Patterson agreed, and the girls settled into chairs near the reading room entrance. Sarah's nervousness grew as the minutes ticked by. What if Henry didn't want to be bothered? What if seeing the newspaper article made him sad instead of happy? What if she was overstepping boundaries by trying to intrude on his private grief? At exactly 2 o'clock, Henry Morrison walked through the library's front doors. He moved slowly but purposefully, nodding politely to Mrs. Patterson as he made his way toward his usual table in the reading room. He looked smaller somehow in the afternoon light, more fragile than he had seemed in the darkened auditorium the night before. Sarah took a deep breath and approached his table, Emma following nervously behind her. Henry looked up in surprise when he realized they were standing beside him. "Sarah, isn't it? From the magic show last night." His voice was kind, but Sarah could hear confusion in it. "What brings you to the library, my dear?" "Mr. Morrison, I hope you don't mind us bothering you, but I found something I thought you might want to see." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she pulled the copied newspaper article from her backpack. Henry's eyes widened as he recognized the headline and photograph. He reached for the paper with hands that shook more than Sarah's, and she could see his breath catch as he studied the image of himself and Margaret as teenagers. "Where did you find this?" he asked softly. "Right here in the library. It's from August 1952. The article says you and Margaret won a dance contest at the summer festival." Sarah sat down in the chair across from him, no longer worried about whether she was intruding. The expression on Henry's face told her she had done the right thing. "I remember this night," Henry said, his voice full of wonder. "We had only been dating for a few months, and Margaret was so nervous about entering the contest. She was afraid we'd embarrass ourselves in front of the whole town." He laughed quietly. "But she was the most beautiful dancer I'd ever seen. Still is, in my memory." Emma leaned forward. "The article mentions Professor Amazing's Magic Spectacular. Was that part of the same event?" Henry's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire appearance. "Oh my goodness, yes. Margaret insisted we stay for the magic show after the dancing was over. She had never seen a professional magician before, and she was absolutely enchanted by every trick. She kept whispering to me, 'How do you think he did that one?' And did you see the way that scarf just disappeared?" He traced the edge of the newspaper photograph with one finger. "This was taken right after we won. Margaret was so excited she could barely stand still for the picture. And that night, after the magic show was over and we were walking home under the stars, I knew I was going to marry her." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. The joy in Henry's voice was so pure and infectious that it filled the quiet library reading room with warmth. "Mr. Morrison," she said carefully, "would you like to keep this copy? I made it specially for you." "I would treasure it," Henry replied, carefully folding the paper and placing it in his coat pocket next to Margaret's glove. "Sarah, I can't tell you what this means to me. I've been coming here for months, looking through these old papers, hoping to find some trace of our early days together. I knew there had been a photograph taken that night, but I could never remember which newspaper it appeared in." "Why were you looking for it?" Emma asked gently. Henry was quiet for a moment, and Sarah wondered if the question had been too personal. But then he smiled again, and she could see that he wanted to share the memory. "Margaret started losing her memory about 2 years ago," he said. "Alzheimer's disease. Toward the end, she couldn't remember my name or recognize my face, but sometimes she would talk about dancing with a handsome young man at a summer festival. She would describe the magic show and her white gloves and the feeling of spinning around the dance floor under Chinese lanterns." He pulled the glove from his pocket and held it alongside the copied newspaper article. "These were the only things that connected her to who she used to be. And I thought if I could find that newspaper article, if I could show her the photograph, maybe it would bring her back to me for just a moment." Sarah felt her heart break for this kind man who had spent months searching through old newspapers for a way to reach his wife's fading memory. "Did you ever find the article before now?" "No," Henry said simply. "She passed away before I could find it. But, Sarah, do you know what I think? I think Margaret sent you to find it for me. I think she wanted me to have this picture and this story, not to bring her back, but to remind me that our love was real and important and worth celebrating." The three of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the library and the weight of a love story that had spanned 7 decades. Sarah realized that what had started as simple curiosity about a mysterious stranger had become something much more significant. "Mr. Morrison," she said finally, "would you like to come to next year's talent show? I'm already planning my act for then, and I think Margaret would want you to keep believing in magic." Henry's smile was radiant. "My dear girl, I wouldn't miss it for the world." The sound Sarah heard was indeed Snowball, but not from where anyone expected. A collective gasp rose from the left side of the auditorium as the white rabbit hopped calmly down the center aisle between the rows of seats. She moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going, stopping occasionally to sniff at interesting shoes or dropped programs. "There she is," shouted a little boy in the 4th row, pointing excitedly as Snowball paused near his feet. "The magic rabbit is down here." Sarah stared in amazement as her rabbit continued her leisurely journey toward the stage. Somehow, Snowball had not only escaped from the trick boxes but had also made her way out of the backstage area and into the main auditorium without anyone noticing. It was impossible, yet there she was, creating more wonder than any planned trick could have accomplished. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced, finding her voice again. "It appears that Snowball has performed the greatest magic trick of all. She's proven that the best magic happens when we least expect it." The audience erupted in laughter and applause as Snowball reached the front of the auditorium and sat up on her hind legs as if taking a bow. Parents pulled out their phones to capture the moment, and children leaned over the edges of their seats to get a better look at the rabbit who had somehow managed to upstage her own magic show. Sarah climbed down from the stage using the small set of steps at the side and walked over to where Snowball was holding court among the front row audience members. The rabbit allowed herself to be picked up without any fuss, seeming quite pleased with all the attention she was receiving. "How did she get down there?" asked Emma, who had appeared at Sarah's side still wearing her fairy costume. "I was watching the whole time from backstage, and I never saw her leave the stage area." Sarah shook her head, genuinely puzzled. "I have no idea. She was in the box, then she wasn't, and now she's here. Maybe she really did perform magic." Mrs. Henderson approached them with a huge smile on her face. "Sarah, that was absolutely wonderful. I've never seen an audience so engaged with a magic show. The way you handled the unexpected moment and turned it into something even more special was truly impressive." "But my trick didn't work," Sarah protested, though she was beginning to realize that something much better than her planned trick had happened instead. "The best performances aren't always the ones that go according to plan," Mrs. Henderson replied. "Sometimes the most magical moments happen when we have to improvise and adapt. You showed real grace under pressure tonight." As Sarah carried Snowball back toward the stage, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. Near the back corner of the auditorium, partially hidden behind a storage cart, sat an elderly man she didn't recognize. He was wearing a worn brown coat and had been so still that she almost missed him entirely. What caught her attention wasn't just his presence. Plenty of grandparents and community members attended the school talent shows, but the fact that he was holding something in his hands. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that it was a white glove, and he seemed to be studying it with intense concentration. "Emma, do you see that man back there?" Sarah whispered, nodding in the direction of the stranger. Emma followed her gaze and frowned. "I don't think I've ever seen him before. He's not with any of the families I know. And why is he just sitting there by himself?" Before Sarah could respond, Mrs. Henderson called for the next act to begin, and they had to clear the performance area. Sarah reluctantly headed backstage to put away her magic equipment, but she couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious man and his glove. During the next few performances, a group of 5th graders singing a medley from a popular musical, twin brothers doing a comedy routine, and a surprisingly good violin solo by a shy 3rd grader. Sarah kept glancing toward the back of the auditorium. The man remained in the same spot, occasionally shifting position, but never taking his attention away from whatever he was holding. "I'm going to go talk to him," Sarah finally whispered to Emma during the violin performance. "Are you crazy?" Emma whispered back. "You don't know anything about him. What if he's some kind of weirdo?" Sarah considered this, but her curiosity was stronger than her caution. There was something about the way the man held that glove, something that seemed important in a way she couldn't explain. I'll be careful. I just want to see what he's looking at. She slipped quietly out of the backstage area and made her way around the edge of the auditorium, staying in the shadows near the wall. The violin music provided good cover for her movement, and most of the audience was focused on the young performer on stage. As she got closer to the back corner, Sarah could see the man more clearly. He appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes that suggested he had spent many years smiling. His clothes were clean but old-fashioned, and his shoes were polished to a shine despite their obvious age. The glove in his hands was white cotton, the kind that people used to wear to formal occasions decades ago. It was clearly old, yellowed slightly with age, and it had been carefully mended in several places with tiny, precise stitches. The man was holding it, as if it were made of the most delicate glass. Sarah moved closer, trying to get a better look without startling him. She was only a few feet away when the man suddenly spoke without looking up. "It belonged to my wife," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the violin music. "She wore these gloves to our first dance together in 1952. Sarah froze, unsure whether she should respond or quietly retreat. The man didn't seem alarmed by her presence, but she felt like she was intruding on a very private moment. She loved magic shows. The man continued, still examining the glove. "Used to drag me to every traveling circus and vaudeville act that came through town." She said magic reminded her that the world was full of possibilities we hadn't discovered yet. He finally looked up at Sarah, and she was surprised to see that his eyes were bright and alert, not sad as she had expected. "Your rabbit reminded me of something she used to say. She believed that the best magic happens when we're brave enough to let go of our plans and trust and wonder instead. Is that why you're here tonight?" Sarah asked softly. "Because of the magic shows?" The man smiled, and Sarah could see traces of the young person he had been many decades ago. "I come to these school shows every year. Your drama teacher is very kind about letting community members attend. I sit in the back and remember what it felt like to believe in magic." He held up the glove again. "Margaret, that was my wife's name. She passed away 3 months ago. 71 years we were married, and she never stopped believing in magic. Even at the end, when she was in the hospital, she would tell the nurses that something wonderful was about to happen." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She had expected to satisfy her curiosity about a strange man with a glove, but instead she had stumbled into something much more profound. "Tonight, when your rabbit appeared in the audience instead of in the box where she was supposed to be," the man continued, "I heard Margaret laughing, clear as day, just like she used to laugh when the magic tricks didn't go according to plan. She always said those were the best moments, when magic surprised even the magicians." The violin solo ended, and the audience burst into applause. The man carefully tucked the glove into his coat pocket and stood up from his chair. "I should go," he said, "but I wanted you to know that what you did up there tonight, the way you turned a mistake into something beautiful, that's real magic. Margaret would have loved it." He started to walk toward the exit, but Sarah called after him. "Wait, what's your name?" He paused at the door and looked back with another smile. "Henry Morrison, and thank you for letting an old man remember what it feels like to believe in wonder." As Henry disappeared through the exit doors, Sarah stood alone in the back corner of the auditorium, trying to process what had just happened. She had gone looking for answers about a mysterious stranger and instead had been given a glimpse into a love story that spanned 7 decades. The applause for the violin performance was dying down, and Sarah realized she needed to get back to her friends before anyone noticed she was missing. But as she hurried along the wall toward the backstage area, she couldn't stop thinking about Margaret Morrison and her belief in magic that surprised even the magicians. When she reached Emma, her friend immediately grabbed her arm. "Where have you been? You missed Jenny's violin solo, and it was actually really good. Did you talk to that weird man?" "He's not weird," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure how to explain what she had learned. "His name is Henry, and he comes to these shows every year. His wife used to love magic." "Used to?" Emma picked up on the past tense immediately. "She died 3 months ago. He was holding one of her gloves from when they were young." Sarah found herself speaking quietly, as if she were sharing a secret. He said Snowball's escape reminded him of her. Emma's expression softened. That's really sad. But also kind of sweet, I guess. Do you think he'll be okay? Before Sarah could answer, Mrs. Henderson appeared beside them. Girls, we need you to help with the next transition. Sarah, can you move your magic boxes off the stage? The dance troupe needs the space for their routine. As Sarah walked back onto the stage to dismantle her magic setup, she found herself looking at the boxes with new eyes. They had been designed to create one kind of wonder, but tonight they had participated in something completely different. Somehow, through a combination of mechanical failure and rabbit initiative, they had helped create a moment of real magic that had touched a lonely widower's heart. She carefully packed Snowball back into her carrier, but not before giving the rabbit an extra treat. I don't know how you knew, she whispered, but I think you performed exactly the right trick tonight. The gymnasium buzzed with excited chatter as families filled the wooden bleachers. Parents clutched coffee cups and programs while children squirmed in their seats, eager for the evening's entertainment to begin. The annual school talent show had become the most anticipated event of the year at Riverside Elementary, and tonight promised to be special. Sarah Martinez adjusted her costume one final time as she peered through the heavy curtains separating the backstage area from the main auditorium. At 12 years old, she had been performing magic tricks for 3 years, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she would attempt her most ambitious illusion yet, making her pet rabbit, Snowball, disappear and reappear in a box across the stage. You're going to be amazing out there, whispered her best friend Emma, who was dressed as a fairy for her own dance routine. Emma's glittery wings caught the backstage lights as she gave Sarah an encouraging smile. The two girls had been practicing their acts together for months, pushing each other to be better performers. Sarah nodded, though butterflies danced in her stomach. She had performed this trick dozens of times in her garage at home, with her parents and younger brother serving as her test audience. Every rehearsal had gone perfectly. The white rabbit would hop into the decorated box on the left side of the stage. Sarah would wave her magic wand and say the special words, and then Snowball would appear in the identical box on the right side through a hidden tunnel system her father had helped her build. Ladies and gentlemen, our next performer is Sarah Martinez with the Great Disappearing Act, announced Mrs. Henderson, the school's drama teacher, from the center of the stage. The audience erupted in applause, and Sarah took a deep breath before walking into the bright stage lights. The auditorium seemed much larger from up there than it had during rehearsals. Hundreds of faces looked back at her expectantly, their expressions ranging from amused to curious to genuinely excited. Sarah spotted her parents in the third row, her mother giving her a thumbs up while her father held up his phone to record the performance. "Good evening, everyone," Sarah said into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Tonight, I'm going to show you real magic. With the help of my assistant Snowball, we're going to prove that sometimes the impossible is just waiting for the right moment to happen." She gestured toward the left side of the stage where her father had helped her set up the ornate wooden box earlier that evening. The box was painted deep blue with silver stars scattered across its surface, and it sat on a small table draped with a midnight blue cloth. 20 feet away, on the right side of the stage, an identical box waited on another table. Sarah reached into a smaller carrier beside her and gently lifted out Snowball. The white rabbit's pink nose twitched as she looked out at the sea of faces, but she remained calm in Sarah's practiced hands. Over the months of preparation, Snowball had grown accustomed to the lights and sounds of performance. "As you can see, Snowball is very real and very much here with us tonight," Sarah announced, walking closer to the edge of the stage so the audience could get a better view. Several children in the front rows pointed and whispered excitedly. "But in just a moment, she's going to travel across this stage faster than your eyes can follow." The audience leaned forward in anticipation. Sarah could feel the energy in the room building as she walked back to center stage. This was the moment she had been working toward for months. All those hours of practice, all the careful planning and preparation had led to this single performance. She placed Snowball gently into the left box and closed the lid with a satisfying click. The rabbit settled into the familiar space, just as she had done countless times during rehearsals. Sarah picked up her wand, a beautiful piece her grandmother had given her, painted white with silver tips, and held it high above her head. "Magic requires belief," she told the audience, her confidence growing as she fell into the rhythm of her practiced routine. "It requires trust in the impossible and faith in wonder. Tonight, we're going to create that wonder together." The auditorium fell silent except for the gentle hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic outside. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat as she prepared to speak the magic words that would trigger the mechanism her father had built into the boxes. "Abracadabra, Mysterium, Transporto," she called out, waving her wand in an elaborate pattern above the left box. The sequence of movements had been carefully choreographed to give Snowball enough time to move through the hidden tunnel connecting the two boxes. She counted silently in her head: 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, giving the trick exactly the amount of time it needed to work. Then, with a flourish, she moved to the right side of the stage and placed her hand on the second box. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to witness true magic," Sarah announced, her voice ringing with confidence. The audience held its collective breath as she lifted the lid of the right box, expecting to reveal Snowball's safe and sound on the other side of the stage. But the box was empty. Sarah stared into the vacant space, her mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. During every single rehearsal, Snowball had made the journey through the tunnel without any problems. The rabbit knew the routine as well as Sarah did. A murmur began to ripple through the audience as people realized something was wrong. Sarah forced herself to smile, though her heart was now pounding for entirely different reasons than stage nerves. She quickly moved back to the first box, hoping against hope that Snowball had simply chosen not to make the journey and was waiting patiently where she had been left. The first box was also empty. The murmur in the audience grew louder, and Sarah could hear concerned voices among the crowd. Parents were beginning to lean forward in their seats, and she could see her mother's worried expression even from the stage. The bright lights suddenly felt much hotter, and Sarah realized that hundreds of people were watching her deal with what was rapidly becoming a disaster. "Sometimes magic takes a little longer than expected," she said into the microphone, trying to keep her voice steady while her mind raced through possibilities. Had Snowball somehow gotten stuck in the tunnel? Had the mechanism failed? Had her rabbit simply decided to explore backstage instead of performing the trick? She knelt down and peered under the tables, hoping to catch a glimpse of white fur, but saw nothing except the dark stage floor and the legs of chairs waiting in the wings. The tunnel system was completely enclosed, so Snowball couldn't have fallen out somewhere in the middle. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the side of the stage, clearly torn between wanting to help and not wanting to interfere with a student's performance. The drama teacher made a small gesture asking if Sarah needed assistance, but Sarah shook her head. She was determined to figure this out on her own. "Let me try a different magic word," Sarah announced to the audience, though she knew the words themselves had nothing to do with how the trick worked. Sometimes rabbits prefer Latin to the regular magic language. A few people in the audience chuckled at this, and Sarah felt a tiny bit of relief that she hadn't completely lost them yet. Children were remarkably forgiving of magic tricks that didn't go according to plan, often finding the unexpected moments more entertaining than the planned ones. She waved her wand again and tried a new combination of made-up words, then checked both boxes again. Still empty. The tunnel system was working correctly. She could feel the air moving through it when she put her hand inside, but there was no sign of Snowball anywhere. As Sarah stood in the center of the stage, surrounded by her carefully constructed magic setup that had somehow failed her at the worst possible moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of giving up or calling for help, she decided to turn this disaster into a different kind of magic altogether. "You know what?" she said to the audience, setting down her wand and walking closer to the edge of the stage. "I think Snowball might be playing a magic trick on me instead of the other way around. She's always been the smartest rabbit I know, and maybe tonight she decided to show off her own skills." The audience seemed intrigued by this new direction. Sarah could see that she still had their attention, even though nothing was going according to plan. "I think we need to help her finish her trick. She's somewhere in this auditorium right now, probably watching us and waiting for the right moment to make her grand entrance." She paused and looked around the room as if searching for clues. Snowball loves applause even more than carrots. If we all clap really loudly, I bet she'll come out to take a bow. The audience began to clap, tentatively at first, then, with growing enthusiasm as the children got caught up in the new version of the show. Sarah conducted their applause like a symphony, raising her hands to make it louder, then lowering them to make it softer. "I can almost hear her moving around back there," Sarah said, though she actually couldn't hear anything except the applause. "Snowball, this is your moment. Show everyone how amazing you are." As the clapping reached its crescendo, Sarah heard a small sound from the wings of the stage that made her heart leap with hope.